Good morning. Welcome to the Anxiety Crusher. Here's the daily event where we'll talk about tactics and techniques to crush your anxiety. It's not mental health, it's real practical tactics that you can use to stop the anxiety spiral before it starts. Everyone has probably experienced some form of an anxiety spiral. Maybe it's catastrophization or one thing leading to another, or dread, this feeling of dread that starts to grow and they try to suppress it. And what's interesting is there's so much information, especially now where there are influencers out there in themselves being stressed out, and they're saying things like, I can't regulate, I can't even regulate myself, it's so bad. They're just talking off the cuff. They're not thinking necessarily about what they're saying or contextually the way I'm using it, but they're giving the signs that they are struggling and they don't have the tools, or the tools that they've always used don't work. And I use the 7-step reset for transformation. My company is Dynamic Leadership. We do executive coaching for small business owners. But the focus is on transformation, to go from a level where you have 10 people to being able to manage an organization with 25 people and then lead an organization with 100 people. Because each time you move up, you have to reset or transform your own thinking to be able to, for example, go from leading direct reports to leading a leadership team to leading a leadership team that has leaders underneath them. So that transformation work is very similar to what happens when we are working against preventing ourselves from falling into the abyss or climbing out of the abyss to get back into what we think of as status quo. Very similar, because 95% of everything we do is done by habit. And what I'll tell you is that habit lives in the network of neurons. There is no subconscious mind. It's a network of neurons. When the subconscious mind first came about in vernacular, this was before the New Thought era, but definitely popularized during the New Thought era, which was from about 1850 to say 1940 or so. Lots of books, and it came together because you had the philosophers learning from each other and you had the printing press. So when those two things came together, the New Thought era, and a lot of the books, whether it's The Science of Getting Rich by Wallace Wattles or The Law of Attraction, that was 1890 or so. You had William James, the prolific writer, and he was called the father of psychology. So all of that was coming together, and the printing press made it explode. And Think and Grow Rich, 1935 or so, right? You had Psycho-Cybernetics, Florence Shin with The Game of Life. All of these books, and Dale Carnegie, mid-1930s. Again, that's called the New Thought era. And all of that work is talked about as the subconscious mind. But there is no mind. It's a network of neurons. And it's a major, major point, because if you think of it as a mind, then it's very difficult to distinguish between what's coming up from the subconscious versus what I'm really thinking and feeling. And that, what you are thinking and feeling and what you want to do, your desire, your life design, that's you. So if I'm talking to a client and they're saying something like, yes, I want to grow my company and I want to get to $35 million by this date, that's them talking. Then later in the conversation, they might say something like, I just can't get myself to manage leaders. I can't get myself to do that. I help them distinguish, wait a minute, hold on. The you wants to grow. The thing that's holding you back, that's not you. That's your associations. That's your habits. That's the 95% of your habitual life, the conditioning that happened largely from 0 to 7, but organized and set into your model of the world from age 19 to 27, when the prefrontal cortex was fully formed. And by making the distinction over and over and over, you get to see, okay, wait, that's me, and this is my habits, and I have the power to change my habits. But when you think of the subconscious as a mind, that means you think of your habits as from the mind. Habits don't live in the mind, they live in the network of neurons. And when you think of the habits as the mind, how does the mind change the mind, right? And that's why we get into these loops. That's why people think that they can't change. That's why there's so much written about habit change. And most of the books that I find on habit change get very, very close. But because they don't make that distinction that the subconscious is the network of neurons and the conscious mind is the mind, it's the only mind, they miss it, and then they use solutions. And another thing that happens, especially for people who are above 50, because we didn't learn about neurons and neurobiology, and that neuroscience didn't really get to be a big thing until the 90s. I'm not saying it didn't exist before that, but you didn't see it showing up in print. I didn't until the 90s. Add to that the brain scanning tools, which gave us some insights as to what was actually going on in the brain during that time, and then here we are. But people who are over 50, people have had to figure it out. They've had to come up with, this must mean that. Oh, this is how it works. I've had people tell me that the subconscious is the higher self. And I would say 100% no. The higher self is our spiritual, and we do have a spiritual self. And then there's a spiritual realm. I'm not talking about the spiritual realm. I'm talking about our spiritual self. That's higher. And then we have the conscious mind. That would be in the middle in this sense. And then we have the subconscious, the definition, right? The subconscious is below. But people have said this, the subconscious is the higher self, and it just creates these disconnects that makes it harder to understand what's actually going on. So in working through that for transformation purposes to rise above the line, and I have a sequence where I talk about above the line and I explain how that looks and why it's hard and what to do about it. When I started seeing all this content online about the anxiety, mainly in the US because of the political things going on and the protests, etc. When I started seeing how many people are struggling with this, and then there's people out of work. We're going on 4 weeks now out of work. And then there are other people who are working, TSA at the airport and the air traffic controllers. They're working and not getting paid. And some of them are taking side jobs. So all this is going on, and I'm watching this and I'm saying, you know what? People in this sense can't think about transformation. They've got to think about, how do I get back to status quo? Because you can't think about growth when you're in protective mode. And you can't help but be in protective mode unless you have the skills I'm talking about now. You will be in protective mode when these things are happening. So I said, let me do this on a daily basis. My intent is to get it down to about 20 minutes once I get some traction and people are showing up, because I want to hit the 7 steps, and at some point it should become like a refresher, because I'll have enough content out there, and using that content, they'll understand the background, and I could jump into the 7 steps, and then they can come online and we can do group coaching. That's the plan, and I'll work that through. But each day I'll be talking about the 7-step reset. In the beginning, more about the background and how it came about and other pieces that apply. And then later it'll be more direct group coaching. There's 2 things I'm doing. One is I will have coaches join me online, counselors, consultants, practitioners, anyone who's in this field, because they have clients and they solve this all the time, and some of their clients are going through anxiety. Now, some of the people will be working with folks who are in the abyss climbing out, but others will have practices like mine, which is about helping people go above the line, but both of us are facing the same thing. So I like to bring people online and we'll have conversations. It's not necessarily a debate, but I do want to give voice to people who disagree with what I'm saying, because if you disagree with me, then I disagree with me until we figure out who's missing information. So that will serve that, and the audience will learn from it, and we'll make distinctions. I have taken this 7-step reset. I've been working on it for several years. I don't think there's any holes in it, but I don't know what I don't know. I can't see what I don't know. This is solid, and I've run these concepts by neuroscientists when I was going through training with them. I feel like there are no holes in it. The way to look at this is that when you drive your car, when you get in your car to drive it, you turn it on, put it in gear, and press the accelerator, you take off. So that's 3 things right there, right? And then you slow down, you make a turn, you unwind from that turn, and you accelerate again, and then you might slow down, and then you might stop. In all of that, you're not thinking about, is this a turbocharged car, or is it a diesel car, or is it an electric car, or is it 4 cylinders, 6 cylinders, or 8 cylinders? Does it have 4 valves per cylinder or 2? You didn't think about any of that. When you're braking, you don't think about, is there brake fluid? What temperature can it handle? Do I have 2 piston calipers or 4 piston calipers, or do I have drum brakes in the back? You don't think about any of that. You just drive. You don't think about what the transmission fluid is doing inside as you're taking off. You don't think about the differential. You're not thinking about the power steering. You're not thinking about the tie rods. You're not thinking about the suspension links. I use that because when I talk about the 7-step, this is not designed for counselors, practitioners, mental health. This is how you drive the car. This is how we use our brain, the way it was designed. We don't need, I see a lot of information out there now about the amygdala and about the prefrontal cortex. And this is all consistent with that because I had to go through that to get there, right? Coherence and brainstem and the reticular activating system. You don't need that information to use the system as it was designed. This 7-step is a roll-up. So for those people who don't care about how the system is designed, this works. If you do care about how the system is designed, I can help you map to those things. So that's the idea of the 7-step reset. It's aligned with neuroscience, but it's something that you can apply immediately. And here's what I'll tell you, that everything I say, you can look up, do a search on it, and you'll find it. Now, because I search for these kinds of things more frequently, your search results might look a little different from mine. If you search how many decisions does a person make in a day, you're going to get something like 33,000 decisions a day. If you search what's the reaction time of the subconscious, you have to use the word subconscious because online it's not written as network of neurons, and a lot of times it'll come back as subconscious mind because remember, search and artificial intelligence is from the past. You'll find that the subconscious has a 1/4 second reaction time. When you look at when does the conscious mind come online, you'll see that it's a 1/2 second. And I don't call it a mind, but online you will see it show up as mind sometimes. I know sometimes ChatGPT will rewrite what I'm saying and call it a subconscious mind because that's what it knows, but it's a network of neurons. I call it a subconscious to make it easy to talk to people about it so that we have a common language, but I've had some people even tell me, we don't use subconscious anymore, now we talk about the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. Well, that just confuses it more. You don't need to know that to be able to apply the 7-step reset. If you search what's the reaction time of the conscious mind, you'll see it's something like a 1/2 second. If you search something like what does the network of neurons do, but you'll see that the network of neurons does the same thing as what the subconscious does. Well, there's no redundancy like that. It's the same thing as the network of neurons. The other thing that makes it difficult for people to grasp is that the network of neurons, what's going through there is energy, right? It's impulses. That's why it's so fast. If you look up what's their speed, the processing speed of the network of neurons, or better yet, what's the processing speed of the subconscious, that one will be more readily available again, because the past and search are calling it subconscious, but it'll say something in the neighborhood of 11 million bits per second. If you say, what's the processing speed of the conscious mind, it'll say something like 50 bits per second. So those things are all baked into here, and you can, for yourself, you can work it all out. You can go through and just work it all out, and you'll come up with these same things. I want to make the connection of where anxiety fits in. So the reason why anxiety, I'm calling it the anxiety crusher, is because it's a habitual action. If you think about where habits lie, habits reside in the network of neurons. And what are habits? They're associations. So you would agree, anyone who does this work would agree that you have a cue or a stimulus. That's what Atomic Habits calls it, a cue. And then you have a reaction, and that's your habit. That's an association. Well, we have trillions of associations throughout the network of neurons because there's 100 billion neurons, and each neuron is connected with anywhere from 1,000 to 10,000 or more other neurons. And so you have all this interconnectedness, and they talk about when the neurons that fire together, they end up wiring together. So this network of neurons, that's where our habits reside. This is why people can see the same thing and have a very different experience because their network, their associations are different. If you think about what an association is, it's I had a stimulus and I had a reaction. Well, that association is from the past. So our habits are from the past. When we see something new and we get an experience, what's happening is our system is associating this new experience with the thing from the past, and this is how you can get into some anxiety. You may see something or you may hear something, and it reminds your central nervous system of something that happened in the past, and that reminder brings up that association. When you see a person getting triggered, it happens. You can see it like spiraling, like cycling up very quickly because what's happening is the associations, the neurons that fire together, wire together, they're connecting to other ones and they're bringing others in and they're bringing others in. And this is why if you ever see some of these videos where there's a policeman holding the gun at somebody in the car and they're shaking, you can see they're already triggered. They're already in that red mist fight or flight mode, and everything that the driver does, they move a little bit, they see that as reaching for a gun. There's no gun, but they see it as reaching for a gun, or they see it as coming at them, and they're freaking out. And this is why the stories don't line up. When somebody says, well, what happened? The stories don't line up because the person was acting out of their network of neurons. They were acting out of habit. And if you look at that behavior, and then you look at somebody experiencing a phobic response, maybe they have a phobia of spiders, it looks the same. It's the same thing. So a phobia is a series of associations that are really intense and they're flying fast. This is why you put a spider in front of a person with a phobia of spiders, they lose all rationality, right? If it's a strong phobia, they lose all rationality. All they can do is run and they're fighting. And if you try to talk to them, you're the enemy and they're attacking you, they're in full-on fight or flight. And what happens is you can see the signs of fight or flight very, very, very early. But if you don't see them as signs of fight or flight because you think it's a mind, you see them as some anxiety is coming. Where's this anxiety coming from? Next thing you know, you start looking for the anxiety, start looking for the source of the anxiety. You look for it, you'll find it, and then it's off and running. The reason this is important is because we do make about 33,000 decisions a day, but it's worse than that or better than that, depending on your perspective, because we're awake about 65,000 seconds a day. So that's roughly a decision every other second. But if you agree that 95% of our actions are by habit, then you'd have to say, okay, so about 31,000 of those 33,000 are actually habitual patterns, meaning associations. So we're not making 33,000 conscious decisions a day. We're making 1,000 or so, 2,000 conscious decisions. But then take it a step further, and you can search this too. How many micro-stimulus response cycles happen in a second? And you might see 2, 3, 4, 5. So now every second we're getting more than one stimulus response cycle. So each of those decisions, what I'm going to call stimulus reaction cycles, you'll have multiple within that. So that means easily we're having well over 100,000 stimulus reaction cycles per day. So that's why it's important. It doesn't come to life until we're working on it on real things. And I go through it pretty quickly. And what I invite people to do is identify where your weak link is, or where you think it is, or what part of it you're having trouble with, and then we'll build on that. I do have a workshop, and this is not to sell the workshop, but in the workshop, we actually practice each of the 7 steps. So you walk away from the workshop with at least an understanding of how that step works in actual practice. That's sort of the backdrop of what we're talking about. On these morning live events, I'll invite people on to bring up their own situations, and you can either come on stage, you'll be on camera, or you can just use the text. And when you bring your experiences up, I'll walk through it with you, and you'll see it real time. The thing is, there are dozens and dozens of levers I pull on, but it doesn't make sense for me to talk about all those levers in a kind of sterile environment. But when we have conversations, if you're either on stage with me or we're doing it in chat, then we'll be able to talk about the actual levers in practice. The other thing is there's no AI. This will always be me, and you'll know that because in the chat I'll be answering real time. So there's 2 distinctions that I'm going to ask people to make. One of those is to think of this as driving the car. So put all your preconceived notions about what habit's about in the subconscious and the conscious mind and law of attraction and all of this stuff. Put that aside for 20 minutes and just think of it as you want to learn to drive the car. So forget about the equivalent would be forget about the turbocharger, forget about how many valves per cylinder, forget about whether or not it's independent suspension or live or axle. Forget about all that and just think about learning to drive the car. That's the one request. The second request is to, in this conversation, start to discern the difference between the signals from the network of neurons versus your thinking from the conscious mind. And remember, I said energy is both, right? Energy is going through the network of neurons as an impulse, and energy is our base level of thought is energy. And so we have to distinguish which one is which. you'll be able to do that by these two things. Now, there's other ways to do it, but initially, the fast way to learn and be right 80 to 90% of the time is by the speed. So because the subconscious or the network of neurons processes at 11 million bits per second and has a reaction time of about a quarter of a second, when the reaction comes very quickly, it's probably coming from the network of neurons. And when the reaction is a repeated reaction, something that's repeated, like self-talk, you may use the same exact language in self-talk. It's coming from the network of neurons. Those are associations. You see something, the associations trigger, and you say this thing to yourself. That self-talk is coming from the network of neurons. Then that's the reaction. And you'll notice I use the word reaction because that's what it is. It's like a survival reaction. In most cases, when a person is already into anxiety, they are making a leap from reaction to response and making those two things equal. The reaction is not the response. I use the two terms separately. So that's how you figure out if it's coming from the network of neurons. Speed and repetition. If it's repeated, that's probably come from the network of neurons, because 95% of everything we do is done by habit. So if it comes back, it's probably habitual, which means it's in the network of neurons. The conscious mind doesn't come online until a half second. So that pause between the reaction and the conscious response is very important, because that's where we can start to shape things. So we don't just pause to be pausing or have a pause that's blank because it'll be filled with subconscious chatter. What we do in that pause is we have the subconscious provide us information that's aligned with our self-design. We condition this in. But again, you'll know if it's a response because you're thinking through it. And a lot of times somebody says, well, how does it make you feel? Or what is that? So tell me what else that's connected to. Or how's this going to impact you? See, a person may look down, they may think, they may do this. Now that's from the conscious mind. So you can ask yourself questions. And when you ask yourself a question, why is that important to me? You'll know right away. Is that coming from the subconscious, the network of neurons, or is it coming from the conscious mind? So those are the two things. If you do that, it'll make your understanding much easier. I think that's something you should always do. So fast is network of neurons. Slow is the conscious mind. And most people don't realize that those two are different. They think it's all from the mind. It's just different, and there's no way to manage it. So this is, once you can understand it, you can manage it. All right, so we're going to jump into the 7 steps. Now since I'm doing this every day, there's a few recordings out there from past days. I do talk about above the line, and I do talk about transformation, and I compare transformation to anxiety, but today I'm going to jump right in on the step. Now we have the pre-stimulus, then we have the in it. This is when we are in it. This is in it, right? And then we have the post. And when you look at the literature that's surrounding habit change and all that, what you'll find is that there's different ways of talking about what to do. Some of those are in the pre, things like breathing and meditating, and you might have diet, nutrition, you may have laying things out in advance. So a lot of this is in the pre, and then you have the in it. You can, count to 10, you can look away, you can get up and walk. It's important to distinguish where these ideas live. Are they in the pre? Are they in the in it? Or are they in the post? And if they're in the pre, that's preventive. And if they're in the post, that's restorative. And we're going to get back on track. If it's in the in it, most of the things that are in the in it phase won't work. The reason why they won't work is because it's too fast. And people are using them as knowledge and information, but it's too fast for that. You have to do it as conditioned reaction. You have to reset the conditioning for the in it phase. So we do that, but that's a very small slice of the overall thing, but it's that small slice is like a lever that wields massive power, because all your habits, that's the in it. They get changed at the in it. They don't get changed at the pre, and they don't get changed at the post. Now, this is important because if we're making 33,000 decisions a day, that means this is happening over and over and over. And our restorative part, so I have 1, 2, 3, you have prevention, you have the in it, and then you have the restorative, or the action as well. All right, so you have the prevention, you have the in it, and then you have the action side and the restorative side. And the reason I call it restorative is action and restorative, because you're going to be in another one. Remember, 33,000 a day, right? And then you'll be in another one. And then you'll be in another one. And in this process, if once you get triggered, It's like a snowball rolling down a hill. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and harder and harder and harder to stop. And that's a good visual to have. But if you catch it at the snowball level, you can just pick it up with your hand. If you catch it at the avalanche level, you're done. And so we need to catch these things early. And what prevention does is it gives us space in here, and it also allows you to apply the new condition out there. In the first step, we have beliefs, we have neuroplasticity. I don't call it habits because I want to make the point that it's neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity is about command of the habit system. And then we have mindset, priming, and physiology. So all of this is in the beginning. All of this is in the first step. And if this is I'll call it like your status quo, your homeostasis. This is how you're going through the day. This is you, right? This is what you're doing. It's once the day starts, we can work on beliefs, we can work on habits, but once the day starts, this is what you've got. But we can work on this every day and make it better for the next day and better for the next day. So when I'm working with the client, a lot of times what I'll do is first I have to work here. I have to give them some space, because if they're triggered and if you're in anxiety or you're having some concerns, you're catastrophizing, we've got to work here. You're not going to solve it here. This is important, but you're not going to see the benefits of this step one in here when you're in it. If I can get you relaxed, when I get you more relaxed and calm, that's why I said just put everything aside for 20 minutes. Then we can give you some space. And once you get some space, then we can start working these other 6 steps. But when you're in it, we've got to work on things that work during the in it phase. And then we have state. And state is mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional. All of those come into play. What state are you in? Because if you're in a heightened or triggered state, it's going to be more difficult for you to command your present moment, to have agency. And then we'll also have self-image. So with self-image, it's not obviously not state, but it influences the state. Self-image can be assessed by your self-talk. If you have a lot of negative self-talk, chances are your self-image is going to be negatively impacted by that. So self-image does come into play. And these 2 steps, that's why I call it prevention. We want to have a positive self-image and a productive self-image, and we want to have beliefs that are aligned with our quest. We want to have the right habits. We want to have the right mindset. We want to have the right priming and the right physiology. So when you come back over to here, if we have 33,000 stimulus reaction cycles a day, and we're just continually feeding the next one over and over and over, you can see why steps 1 and 2 are so important. These are important to get set. And every day, I would say we should be working on 1 and 2. Now, for example, one of the ways I work on step 2 on a daily basis is I do a morning breathing process. I go 10 minutes, 13 count inhales and 13 count exhales. The reason I call that a step 2 process is because I can instantly get back there. It becomes an anchor. All I have to do is take in a deep breath, right? I don't even have to go the full 13 seconds, but as soon as I start taking in a deep breath, I'm automatically anchored. It's an association. I'm automatically set into that habit pattern of that calm state I get to when I'm doing 13 counts in and out. And this is not rocket science. People do it all the time when it's physiological, but what they don't realize is the physiological is not muscle initially, it's network of neurons. And so then the same network of neurons that drive our thinking, drive my speaking, are the same network of neurons that drive my physiology, my muscle actions. And so that idea of deep practice building muscle memory is nervous system memory. And that's why this process works. So this is what we're doing in step 2. And then we're in the in it. This is the stimulus and conditioned reaction. And that conditioned reaction is what leads us to our habitual behavior. And too often people make the conditioned reaction equal to the response. Step 4. And then that response, people let that jump to action. But there's a step in between there that you have to consider, and that step in between is emotional modulation. And then after that, we have to get back to, this is the restorative part. Emotional modulation, it's 0 to 90 seconds. We don't always have to use emotional modulation. And if you're doing the work, or it's step 1, and you are moving, you've got your limiting beliefs neutralized, you have your neuroplasticity to where it's designed for your quest, you have your mindset able to get back to a growth mindset instantly, and I'm talking about in seconds, not minutes. and you have your priming such that you're priming yourself, you're not being primed by external, and that when you are being primed by external, you're actually noticing it and understanding what's going on. And then you have your physiology in more of a courageous posture rather than a fearful posture or a defeated posture. When you're doing that, and you have your state, your mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional state is at an even keel, it's at a productive, something like a flow state, and your self-talk, your self-image is positive. When you've done all that, you're better equipped to handle this. And this is so important because this is a quarter of a second, 250 milliseconds. If you don't catch it in that first quarter of a second, as this begins to happen, your chances of catching that decrease exponentially. So then we have the response, and because we don't have a reaction that equals a response, we get a nice little pause in here. And during that pause, it's where you do some of those things that we've learned. You can do a box breath, you can do a quick box breath or a mini box breath. I have clients extract from the reaction, don't just give me the reaction. I want also to have a quick assessment of the situation. So remember, this is 11 million bits per second processing speed. This is 50 bits per second. So if our processing speed here is 50 bits per second, and our processing speed here is 11 million bits per second, during this quarter second pause, I can have the network of neurons give me information to help me with making my assessment when I get to the response mode. So that's the 7 steps. Now, each of these has multiple levers. I'll give you an example of a lever here. So one of them is neuroplasticity. We want to change the habit, we use deep practice. You want to get to a growth mindset or stay in a growth mindset, use the word yet. You can use transformational vocabulary. For example, if you're in sales, I learned this process, this part of it, 35 years ago. Instead of saying rejection, I started calling it I wasn't appreciated. So in sales, if you're in a sales call, they rejected me. No, they didn't reject you. They just didn't appreciate the offer. Big difference, right? You can even feel your shoulders lift. But I went from embarrassment. I don't use the word. I don't get embarrassed because I don't have a word like that. My word is amused. It was amusing or interesting. So that's transformational vocabulary. State, I already mentioned we could use breathing. We can use anchors. Self-image, you can start changing your self-talk. So for example, self-talk can fall into 3 categories. It can fall into pure degradation where you are degrading yourself. It could be where you are reminding yourself of mistakes you've made in the past. And it could be where you're reminding yourself of bad luck that happened. Each of those has a different reaction that we condition in. So if it's about a mistake that you made, we condition in a response that was wisdom. I learned from that. I'm grateful for the learning. Grateful that I learned that. If you start saying that every time that negative self-talk comes in, that degrading self-talk, you follow it with, I'm glad I learned from that. You've processed it. You are literally processing it real time. If it's degrading, so something like I'm stupid, but if it's degrading self-talk like I'm stupid, then what you want to say is I cancel that. So if it's degrading, you say I cancel that. I cancel that. So each time it comes up, you're canceling it or cancel. I'm great. Cancel. I'm great. And then if it's bad luck, you just say, that's life. Life happens. Sometimes it goes my way, sometimes it doesn't. What you're doing is you're giving a new association to each of those self-talks that keep repeating. And that new association, what it does is it resets what's going on here and it reduces the likelihood of you catastrophizing and going off. That's just one example, again, of a lever on self-image. When we're in it, an example of a lever, one is I do the positivity exercise. The positivity exercise is more of a drill. You do that for 6 weeks, 3 times a day. It only takes you 90 seconds, but you're literally conditioning your subconscious to not look for the negative, the peril, the threat. You're conditioning it, instead of looking for the threat 80% of the time, you're getting it to see the positive 80% of the time. And this is not PMA stuff. It's not reframing. We are conditioning the subconscious. Subconscious is wired to look for threats and scary stuff. And it does that. And as a result, things that are neutral, an email, you get a letter in the mail, and immediately you might think, what is bad? You haven't even opened it. Your phone rings. You think it's bad. That's the subconscious automatically assuming that any stimulus or most stimulus are negative. What we're going to do is condition in a new response with that positivity exercise. Another thing we can do is the swish pattern. A person is saying a lot. They say and they're trying to get rid of the They've been trying to get rid of it for years. What we do is a swish pattern so that as they're about to say the we replace it with a new behavior. You can think of it as I wouldn't do this with a big phobia, but I would do it with a mild phobia, is that as the person is thinking, and a mild phobia would be just a strong stimulus reaction cycle. But as the person is thinking about a spider, they immediately shift to a more empowering thought, a more positive thought. We're changing that association because remember, neurons that fire together wire together. So we're stopping that wiring in its tracks. And then we have the response, an example of a lever in response is there's a thing called MacGyver method. You could look up the book MacGyver. It's called MacGyver method. So this is the guy who wrote MacGyver. He was the writer for the hit series MacGyver, who would come up with these cool solutions with gadgets that were just around him. The writer of that would give his subconscious instructions to come up with the solution. Then he goes away and does something else. He'll run, ride a bike, hike, spend time with the family, go to a movie, whatever. And he comes back at whatever time he told the subconscious to give it to him, and the subconscious is giving it to him. So the subconscious can do that. You can give it instructions. You don't have to wait hours like MacGyver talks about in the book. You can actually do this in milliseconds. We can condition the subconscious to give you the first step of problem solving, which is clearly define the problem. So instead of it just giving you the stimulus and the reaction, you're getting an assessment of that's the first step of problem solving. That's all at the conditioning levels. By using the prevention steps 1 and 2, we're giving you a much better chance to not catastrophize in step 3, because in that step 3, you're processing 2 million bits per second. So let's put that 2 million bits to good work rather than let it take us down the wrong path. And then by doing that, you have a better chance of a good response. And then we use what's called emotional modulation. Emotion is energy in motion. And initially, emotions are just energy. But if you let it harbor and you dwell on it and you let it sit, it turns into a feeling. Now it's in the network of neurons. Now it's available for more catastrophization. And so what we're doing here is in 90 seconds, we're letting that emotion pass through, but you have to process it. And the way we process it is we locate it, then we label it, and then we learn from it. And what you want to do is have I use the 8 labels from Joan Rosenberg's book, 90 Seconds to a Life You Love. And those labels, the purpose of them are to take things out of this nebulous, generalized term of its anxiety to what is it actually. So she has 8 terms. She says all your anxious type emotions can be distilled to these 8. And it's sadness and shame, disappointment, helplessness, frustration, anger, embarrassment, and vulnerability. So now once you label it, just think about it. If I'm vulnerable versus frustrated, I have a different action. If I'm sad versus angry, it's a different reaction. It's something different that you're going to do. So just by labeling it, you start empowering yourself. And that's just another lever. And again, I could talk about levers in each one of these. I can talk about dozens of levers, but it makes more sense when I bring them up in the context of what's actually going on, which is why I invite people to come online and have a chat about whatever they're going through. And then we actually can apply this to what's going on. And then action, easy lever there is, do you do it, you delegate it, you discard it, or you delay it. So I should say do it, delay it, delegate it, discard it. It's 4 Ds. That's just your action. But the action part is people know that. So when I'm working with clients, the action that they take when they're leading direct reports, like there's 10 people in a company and they're leading frontline people, their action might be different than it is when they're leading leaders. Because now they first have to organize the work. They're not just going to delegate something. They're not going to say, hey, do this. They're going to organize the work in such a way that they're organizing buckets. So that would just be an example of how there's different levers in action. And then we have present moment or mindfulness. And how do we return to the present moment? A lot of your meditation work is all about the present moment. But when you're in it, when you're catastrophizing, it's very hard to get into meditation. But we can meditate and lock in that state. And one of the things you can do is 1 minute moments. So this is a lever, 1 minute moments, box breathing. If you do 4 box breath cycles, that's a minute. 4 counts in, hold for 4 counts. 4 counts, exhale, hold for 4 counts, 4 counts, inhale, right? You do that cycle 4 times, that's a minute. And in that 1 minute moment, you are setting your state, you're resetting yourself. So those are examples of levers that happen in each of these that you can do right now. You can apply each one of those and you'll start to get some space. You can watch other videos, and I'll put links to other work that I've done on that page, 7stepreset.com/live. So you have resources and you can self-coach. In these morning sessions, I want to focus on the 7-step reset and getting people working through that. When I get enough traction there, I'll introduce the 7 performance areas, because now we can take the 7 performance areas, which are mental, physical, spiritual, emotional, relationships, professional, and financial. Now, if you look at this, most people start their quest over here. They have a financial goal, and then they decide how they're going to go after it, and then they start reaching out to people. What I say is hold off on this. We're going to get this right. And this is almost like your prevention steps. The mental, physical, spiritual, emotional. We do a lot of this work in here. And we do laps. The more room we get in this process, in it, the more room we get, the more we can do here. Once the person builds the habits, mental, physical, emotional, then we can start working on this, because we've created the new identity. This is like that new identity, the identity that we need for that quest. And to design the quest, when we don't have the identity for it, we're going to come up short. And because things are going so fast, I talk about VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, has led to this new term, BANI, brittle, anxiousness, nonlinear, and incomprehensible. So VUCA's like from the external, BANI's the internal, right? It's the result. We're going to be going through this probably multiple times in a career, whereas our hunter-gatherer ancestors, they did this once in a lifetime. They had the conditioning and it lived. So how a person hunted when they were 7, hunted and gathered, they probably hunted and gathered the same exact way when they were 35. Today, what we learned in 0 to 7 is completely different than what we do today. So that is it. You can go to 7stepreset.com/live. You'll get some other resources. You'll see this recording as well as other recordings. I'll update some of the ones where I go more in depth, and you'll see my next recording. But without more information, you can assume it's going to be on Monday at 8 a.m. Pacific time. Have a great weekend.